Every survivor in Risk of Rain 2 is defined by their abilities, a set of at least 4 special skills that make them unique from all the others. But do you know how to use them? Hi, I'm Socks, on the run from the police for my various paint bucket related crimes, and today we'll be going over one tip for every single ability in Risk of Rain 2. If you end up learning something in this video, I would really appreciate it if you subscribed, since that would help me out a lot. And without further ado, let's begin with the video, starting with Commando. Double Tap. While some people may look at its mediocre damage and just accept that they aren't going to get any better, that isn't the strength of this ability for a reason. The real strength of Double Tap is its high proc coefficient, which allows you to consistently proc all of your chance-based items very consistently. Because of this, Commando is not really a survivor who gets his strength from his abilities, but rather how they interact with the items you can find in your runs. Double Tap might not do a lot of damage, but the ATG missile launcher does, and Double Tap is very good at proccing many instances of the ATG missile launcher. Phase Round. The description of this ability is a little bit misleading, as the way it's worded sounds like it only adds 40% base damage per enemy you pierce with the attack. This is untrue, and the ability actually gains 40% total damage after piercing an enemy, in turn dealing 120% more base damage. Because of this, it is possible to proc the Kajaro and Renaald's bands after piercing just one enemy. Phase Blast. This ability should be basically used off cooldown, as it's one of Commando's most powerful. Since it is a shotgun, it won't proc the bands, but it will still do a serious amount of damage, allowing you to insta-kill squishy enemies and reliably melts down stronger ones. It can be useful to stitch this into your muscle memory in order to min-max your damage correctly. Tactical Dive. This ability should be used similarly to how you use Huntress's Phase Blink ability, which we'll talk about later. What I mean is to use it more as a simple dodge rather than a map traversal tool. I recommend you learn the enemy's attack durations as best you can, as it will allow you to consistently dodge them. It also pisses me off that this ability is called a Tactical Dive when it is clearly a roll. Tactical Slide. This is, in my opinion, the far superior utility in Commando's kit. While it is not omnidirectional like Tactical Dive, meaning you can only use it by moving forward, it sends you much farther, works as a double jump, and you can still fire during it. I recommend you unlock this ability as soon as possible, as it is leagues better than the dive. Suppressive Fire. Suppressive Fire should be used more for its stun than its damage. Once you get decent enough attack speed, this ability kind of falls off as the bullets don't deal any increased damage compared to your normal primary fire. A neat trick you can use with this ability is to not just stun one enemy at a time, but instead quickly aim at 2 different enemies to spread out the stun. Frag Grenade. This ability can struggle because of its tendency to bounce off the terrain. This can be avoided, however, by learning how to throw the grenade at the enemy's feet to get it stuck on their hitbox. Despite my disdain for this ability, it is rather powerful and will stay relevant throughout your run, unlike its Suppressive Fire counterpart, so I highly recommend you learn how to use it properly. Strafe. Remember that both of Huntress's primary fire abilities have the agile trait, meaning you can use them while sprinting. This means that you should basically always be holding down left click when in a fight, even if you're trying to run away. Strafe is fairly simple and has the same proccing power as Commando's Double Tap, so the tip I gave for that ability works here as well. Flurry. Just remember to take all the crit items you can, as getting a critical hit with this attack fully doubles its potency, along with each individual arrow's damage. This primary option is often better in the long run compared to Strafe, but it can take a while to get off its feet. Even still, you can usually achieve a higher DPS with Flurry than Strafe. Laser Glaive. Remember to only use this ability when there is a group of enemies in front of you. Using it on a single enemy is usually a waste of time, as your primary fire could have dealt that damage on its own. It's great for clearing out large groups of blind pests, wisps, or other squishy enemies, so I highly recommend that you save this cooldown for those instances. Also, this ability can proc the bands on its 5th and 6th hit, which can be useful to remember. Blink. This ability, like Commando's Slide, can be used only in the forward direction, and should be used more as a map traversal tool than a quick escape. If you are going to take this ability over Phase Blink, it is important to learn how to dodge enemies without using the ability, as the 7-second cooldown can leave you incredibly vulnerable. Phase Blink. My tip for this ability is kind of geared towards PC players, but I recommend you rebind this ability to a mouse button or something similar, as you will be using it a lot. I personally think this ability is much better than its non-phase counterpart, as it will allow you to dodge a lot more easily and consistently, but at the end of the day, it's really up to you as to which utility you choose to use. Arrow Rain. Despite my dearest want for this ability to be worth using, it pales in comparison to Ballista, Huntress's other special ability. It has worse proc coefficient, worse damage, and struggles to work against airborne enemies since you can only target terrain. If you really want to use this ability though, try to place it where your enemies are going, not where they are, in order to get the most value out of it. Ballista. While you can use this ability to clear out a group of weaker targets, I recommend you save the full 2700% damage for your stronger enemies. This ability will fire as fast as you can click, so it can be useful to practice clicking 3 times in quick succession, as you don't want to be hanging in the air for too long lining up your shot. Backstab. Because Bandit's passive allows him to automatically deal critical damage when attacking an enemy from behind, it can actually be a decent idea to take the Lost Seer's lenses over the Lensmaker's glasses when confronted with the option. Other than that, Bandit's utility can be easily used to get behind enemies and stun them to get more value out of this passive. Burst. This goes for both of Bandit's primary fire options, but attack speed items will only decrease the time it takes to reload. This can be useful, but it really isn't a problem in the first place, so it's usually not a bad idea to scrap your speed items in exchange for something stronger. Also, both primaries will reload faster if you spend all of your ammo, rather than if you have a few bullets left in your weapon. Blast. I only learned this recently, but Blast actually has no fall-off damage, making it unique to most other primary fires. This means that you don't always have to close the distance between you and an enemy if you want to kill them, and you can just kind of poke them to death from afar. Serrated Dagger. This goes for both of Bandit's secondaries, but they can be used to completely cancel your fall momentum. Use this to save yourself from a fall when your smoke bomb is on cooldown. Serrated Shiv. Since this is a projectile instead of a melee attack, the Serrated Shiv can be an awkward ability to use when trying to get behind an enemy. I recommend you learn to use the Serrated Dagger more often, as its damage is objectively better, with the only trade-off being range, which Bandit doesn't really struggle with. Smoke Bomb. This ability can be used as a pseudo triple jump to bounce over enemies and climb terrain. Both entering and exiting the ability will bounce you upwards, and it's a very valuable tech to learn. Lights Out. When paired with a crowbar or two, Lights Out can be very effective at clearing out groups of enemies that might take longer to kill with your other abilities. Remember that you can accidentally cancel both Lights Out and Desperado by sprinting during their wind-up animation, so just keep that in mind. Desperado. My tip for Desperado is to not spend too much time trying to collect stacks of it. Yes, it can become very powerful over time, but you can inadvertently waste a lot of time waiting for the cooldown when you could have just killed the enemy normally. Auto Nail Gun. Most people know that the nail gun has a secondary feature where it fires a shotgun spread of nails after you let go of the primary fire button. This can be useful for finishing off squishy enemies, or adding a little extra damage into the boss when you need to reposition. However, it has a roughly 1 second cooldown before you can start firing again, so I really recommend that you don't bother using this feature unless you are absolutely sure it will finish an enemy off. Rebar Puncher. There is a fairly well-known tech you can use with the Rebar Puncher primary in conjunction with the Retool special ability. By pressing the Retool button after you shoot with the Rebar Puncher, you can quickly reset your primary fire faster than you could if you just let it cool down on its own. Scrap Launcher. Seeing as this primary fire option is sort of in between the rebar puncher and the auto nail gun in terms of sustained damage versus actual potency, most people sort of ignore its existence. In my opinion, though, this ability is actually preferable to the others as it allows you to spread out your damage more consistently. My tip for this item is just that when using power mode, the secondary slot will gain more charges if you are carrying a backup magazine. Power Saw. Despite how funny it might be, I highly recommend that you do not run double Power Saw on MUL-T. While it is the most powerful primary option in his kit, it is a melee weapon, and unlike the other melee survivors, MUL-T doesn't have the movement or range to make up for it. If you are going to insist on using this, try to build into defensive items as you will be taking a lot of poke damage from things like wisps and blind pests that you could otherwise deal with a lot more easily. Blast Canister. There is a niche interaction between Blast Canister and Power Mode, where all of the charges of Blast Canister will be refilled upon leaving the ability. This means that if you have a lot of backup magazines and want your charges back quickly, you can enter and exit Power Mode, refreshing all of the cooldowns much faster than they would normally. Transport Mode. Most survivors have at least one ability that allows them to cancel fall damage. MUL-T is not one of those survivors, but he can greatly reduce it by using Transport Mode just before he hits the ground. This is because the armor granted by Transport Mode also applies to fall damage, so just keep that in mind in case you accidentally slip off the top of Helmet Hatchery or something like that. Retool. This ability, in my opinion, is more niche than you may have been led to believe. While being able to swap between two different primary fires and equipment items is good, using both of them at the same time with power mode is often more effective. I find that the two equipments thing isn't as valuable as you'd think. Maybe I'm just not as smart, but I often forget that I even have them. It only really comes into effect in the niche situations where you need to save a Trophy Hunter's Tricorn and carry a Recycler or something like that. Power Mode. A weird quirk with this ability is that the ability in the second slot takes the accuracy of the one in the first slot. This means that by equipping the Power Saw in the first slot and the Auto Nail Gun or Scrap Launcher in the second slot, your right side attack will have virtually zero spread at all, making it much more effective at range. Bouncing Grenades. Just like Commando's Frag Grenade, you'll want to aim this at your enemy's feet so that the grenades are much less likely to miss. It's definitely easier to hit this ability over Frag Grenade though, seeing as the grenades will explode on contact. Other than that, I actually recommend you try building into attack speed when you can, as it's surprisingly effective with this ability. Pressure Mines. I don't like the Pressure Mines. I'll be honest, 90% of the time when I use this ability, it explodes before it charges, or just doesn't do anything at all. And while the damage can be very powerful, it's a lot of effort to put into an ability that struggles to hit even the stupidest of enemies. If you could place more than 4 at a time, I'd maybe accept this as being a decent alternative to Spider Mines, but you can't. I guess it's always wise to toss them out arbitrarily around the teleporter before you start it, so that they can charge before the enemies spawn in. Spider Mines. These are leagues better than the Pressure Mines, in my opinion, as while they do deal less damage, they are far more effective at actually hitting enemies. They proc bans and are very easy to use in a pinch, which is why I recommend you use them over their alternative. Bubble Shield. Do not use the Bubble Shield. I don't care what anyone tells you about this ability. While it is a decent defensive option, it doesn't actually protect you from half of the attacks in the game. Some explosions will hit through it, as will any area of effect attacks thrown at you from enemies like the Mini Mushroom. This ability encourages you to stand still, which is like the biggest mistake you can make when learning to play Risk of Rain 2. Thermal Harpoons. This ability is actually uniquely buffed by the Pocket ICBM legendary item in exactly the way you would expect. The first stack adds 2 more missiles per shot fired, and further stacks will increase their damage, making them incredibly powerful in the long run. Stationary Turrets. Engineer's turrets are where the bulk of his power actually comes from. Effectively being able to be 3 people at once is insanely powerful once you start to gather items. My tip for honestly both of the turrets is to remember how they interact with certain abilities. They will never leave the radius of a war banner, can constantly keep Bungus activated, and can usually use your proccable items better and more consistently than you can. Walking turrets. I'll be honest, while their damage over time is less than that of the stationary turrets, I've warmed up to the walking turrets a bit over time. Their damage is less, but it isn't pathetic, and they can even use some on-taking damage items like the Old War Stealth Kit, Unstable Transmitter, and Genesis Loop more effectively than you could. I recommend you practice with both turrets, as it's really up to you as to which you prefer to use. ENV suit, or NV suit, I don't know what it is. Since this ability isn't much more than a slow fall, there isn't much to say about it. My tip for it, though, is to not stay in the air for too long. Being airborne can definitely make you harder to catch, but it also makes you an easier target for enemies on their own, particularly ones with fast-moving projectiles or lasers. Flame Bolt. This tip sort of goes for both of Artificer's primary fire options, but in my opinion, you should really be leaning into the burst damage aspect of this ability. Yes, you can get attack speed items to lower the cooldown of this ability, but that honestly takes a while to actually get done. Instead, you should just be throwing out all of your primary fire charges and then using the cooldown time to reposition. Plasma Bolt. This ability is rough to justify taking. The only advantage you get from this over Flame Bolt is the larger explosion radius, but that doesn't really mean much. I suppose just grab proccable items with this one. Charged Nano Bomb. The choice between Nano Bomb and Nano Spear is really up to you. They both deal similar damage, and the only real difference is that the Nano Bomb is harder to hit for a slightly higher damage output than the Spear. Remember that this attack is more forgiving than you might think, so don't be afraid to lob it at a flying enemy every now and then. Backup mags are your best friend, too, and should be kept whenever you find them. Cast Nano Spear. This ability can be used, albeit inconsistently, to push enemies off the map. Bosses, too. It isn't exactly reliable and seems to only happen when you aren't really trying to do it, but with enemies like the Clay Dunestrider and the Beetle Queen, you can fairly consistently push them off the map. Snap Freeze. A neat thing you should remember to do during the Mithrix fight is to place this ability right down in the center of the stage when he jumps up between phases. It will allow you to instantly freeze him, leading to some very easy early damage during that phase where he cannot fight back. Flamethrower. This ability is just bad. It takes away Artificer's only movement ability and replaces it with an ability with mediocre range and damage that isn't even agile. I recommend you use this ability once to see how bad it is and then never again, as it really is a waste of time. Ion Surge. This ability can be used to completely skip the pillars in commencement, and because of that, combined with the fact that Flamethrower sucks, you should never have to complete a pillar event on Artificer. Cybernetic Enhancements. It's a double jump. That's it. There's not really much more to say about that. I guess something interesting is that carrying a wax quail will also make the second jump send you farther, but that's about it. Laser Sword. Mercenary is a survivor that demands a certain amount of rhythm. On other survivors, you can sort of just use your abilities whenever, but on Mercenary, you need to use them in tandem with one another in order to get the maximum amount of value out of them. The simplest way to do this is to use your secondary immediately after applying Expose from the third hit of your primary fire to min-max your damage as much as possible. Whirlwind. Whirlwind should be taken over Rising Thunder if you want to have a significantly easier time clearing out groups of squishier enemies. Remember that this attack will swing vertically instead if you are mid-air, granting it a little bit more creativity with how you can use it. Rising Thunder. This ability, on the other hand, should be used to increase your single target damage. When taking this ability, I highly recommend you take as many backup mags as you can, as it is an incredibly useful tool for vertical movement. Try to learn how high it actually sends you so you can use it more consistently on small flying enemies like wisps and blind pests. Blinding Assault. This should be used more for its movement than its damage. Yes, it can be used fairly consistently for damage, but due to its quirk of being able to be used up to 3 times in a row, you can use it to travel great distances to escape a fight as well. Don't be afraid to use 1 to 2 charges of the ability either, as the cooldown isn't that punishing. Focused Assault. This utility option, on the other hand, should be used for its damaging capability instead of its movement. Try to line up as many enemies as possible first before using it to get the maximum amount of value out of it that you can. A weird quirk of this ability is that it actually travels farther with the more attack speed items you have, so remember that as well. Eviscerate. My one tip for Eviscerate is to just be very careful when using it. Once it's done, you'll pop right out in front of an enemy in a very vulnerable position. So it should really only be used as a finishing tool rather than a simple damaging one. Slicing Winds. Slicing Winds is insanely powerful for proccing your other items, as for some reason, despite having such high attack speed, it still has a 1.0 proc coefficient per individual hit, and it can hit up to 3 enemies at once. Even tossing it at a group of beetles will produce pretty insane value when you're carrying even so much as a single ATG missile launcher or something like that. Natural Toxins. The Weaken debuff will reduce an enemy's armor by 30, making it a great pairing with other armor-reducing items like the Symbiotic Scorpion and Shattering Justice. I wouldn't try to metagame this too hard, however, because so much as vaguely looking at an enemy on Rex will apply the Weakened debuff. Directive Inject. This ability is your main way of applying the weakened debuff, and since your other attacks can also inflict slow and tangled onto enemies, the Deathmark uncommon item will be much easier to proc and will be your best friend on Rex. Directive Drill. While this ability suffers from the same issues that Huntress's Arrow Rain does, it can be used much more frequently and successfully when combined with the Tangling Growth ability that can hold large groups of enemies still, so use those abilities in tandem whenever you can. Seed Barrage. When timed correctly, you can cancel the short cooldown of your primary fire with Seed Barrage, which greatly increases your damage per second. I'd be careful when using this tech, however, as it comes at the cost of your HP. Directive Disperse. This ability requires a lot of practice to get down, but once you learn it well enough, it can be used as a very useful movement ability. The choice between utility options on Rex is really up to whether you want to use this ability in a more defensive or offensive way, and since this is his only harmless movement ability, it's not a bad idea to use it purely for its movement. Bramble Volley. Remember that both utility abilities will not move you at all if you are touching the ground. This can be used to fairly consistently deal with groups of squishier enemies that are trying to swarm you. For a while, I really didn't like this ability, but after using it for a bit, I've come around and see it now as the decent damaging ability that it is. Directive Harvest. I'm going to be so honest, I didn't fully understand what this ability did until I made this video. Basically, it should be used on stronger enemies so that once you kill them, you can quickly heal to full health. Other than that, this ability doesn't do a whole lot, since self-healing was never something Rex struggled with. Tangling Growth. This is one of the strongest crowd control abilities in the game, as it can essentially hold a large group of enemies still for free. Remember to combine this with your area of effect items and abilities to very quickly deal with the enemies you caught with Tangling Growth. Scrap Barrier. Since this ability completely removes your fall damage, it doubles as a fantastic escape tool if the enemies ever get you to low health. It's a little inconsistent, but if need be, you can just jump off the map to be teleported away from the enemies without taking any damage, so just keep that in mind when you need a quick get-out-of-jail-free card. Knuckle Boom. This ability is fairly simple, just being a punch. But one useful thing to know about it is that you can still use it while using one of your grapples. This allows you to continue fighting stronger airborne enemies like wandering vagrants and greater wisps a little bit more consistently. Grapple Fist. A neat piece of tech that exists with the Grapple Fist is how you can use it indefinitely by intentionally getting stuck. By putting something in between the point you grappled to and yourself, you can get stuck until you let go of the ability. This might seem useless, but can actually be used during the commencement escape sequence where you can actually hang below the escape shuttle platform and charge it for free. You still need to get near the escape shuttle to actually leave once it's charged, but that shouldn't be a problem due to your passive. Spiked Fist. My tip for the Spiked Fist is to simply learn what enemies will be pulled to you and what enemies will pull you to them. It would take too long to go into detail about all of them, but there are 3 levels of enemies: light, medium, and heavy or large enemies. Light enemies are the small ones like beetles and wisps and will be pulled to you. Medium enemies will pull you to them and are basically any big enemy that isn't a boss. And heavy or large enemies are basically just any of the boss enemies and scavengers, which will also pull you to them. Charged Gauntlet. Remember that this ability is designed to pierce through a large group of enemies. You can still use it on a single target, but the charge-up time of the ability will leave you quite vulnerable if you aren't positioned well. Remember that both of Loader's Gauntlet options have the heavy attribute, which means it will deal significantly more damage when you are moving quickly, so it can be a good idea to grapple onto an enemy before punching them to build up some extra speed. Thunder Gauntlet. This ability is very strong damage-wise, but is significantly more powerful when used alternatively as a movement tool. The short cooldown and very fast animation speed makes this ability very useful even if you don't hit anything with it. Remember that you can charge both gauntlets while grappling onto something as well. M551 Pylon. My tip is honestly universally known at this point and is even now in the description of the ability, but you can grapple onto your pylon with both grapples if you need to. It isn't super useful, but it can be used to cross over large gaps and climb over ledges every now and then. Thunder Slam. Despite me thinking it should, this ability does not get stronger by falling during the animation like the headset legendary item does. Because of this, it can be used as a quick alternative to your gauntlets if you don't want to be repositioned by the recoil of their punch. Otherwise, be wary of taking this ability over your pylon, as enemies like wisps and blind pests will be much more annoying to deal with without it. Poison. My tip for Poison is to try and keep it active on the strongest enemies even if you need to reposition and stay alive. Poison is incredibly powerful, but it needs time to get all the value it can, so you need to play into that by constantly keeping it up. Also, remember that it will not kill enemies, and you'll have to deal the final blow yourself. This usually isn't an issue, but don't go thinking an enemy is going to die just because it's poisoned. Blight. Okay, I'm going to be so honest. Blight really isn't as bad as people say it is. Yes, it does fall off in the long run, and is held back by the fact that the stacks don't refresh, but it still deals some pretty serious damage when played with correctly. My tip for this one is to just try it out on your own, instead of letting other people dictate your opinions for you. Vicious Wounds. The third hit of this ability will briefly increase Acrid's base regeneration and is a very useful tool for keeping pressure up on an enemy. If you just need to heal and don't want to accidentally kill an enemy before you can do so, you can tactically miss the first 2 non-healing slashes so that the next hit you deal will heal you. Neurotoxin. This is Acrid's primary ranged option, and because of that, backup magazines are your best friend. Try to treat this ability as if it's your primary fire, and use it basically off cooldown, since it's your best way of applying your passive on a single target. Ravenous Bite. Ravenous Bite should be thought of as a free use of the third hit of your primary fire. Its damage is alright, but it should be treated more as a way to quickly heal when you're in a pinch. Due to the low cooldown, this should also basically be used off cooldown when you're close to an enemy, as there's really no reason not to. Caustic Leap. There are countless tips I could give for Caustic Leap, but if I had to choose one, it would be that it is an amazing tool for dodging fall damage. When you are in the ability, you take no fall damage, so you should use it frequently to save yourself if you fall off the map. This ability has 2 charges, so I suggest you use the first charge to engage into a fight and save the second to escape. Frenzied Leap. Listen to me closely. Do not use this ability unless you are going to land on an enemy. The 10-second cooldown is brutal, and will leave you without an escape tool if you use the ability incorrectly. So always be sure to hit at least 1 to 2 enemies to avoid this. Epidemic. This ability is the best way to apply your passive onto a large group of enemies, and because of that, you should never really bother using it unless there are at least 3 to 4 enemies in front of you. I recommend you use it on the same group of enemies twice, as the initial hit of Epidemic can execute any enemies left at 1 HP from your poison, and it will reapply Blight if you choose to use that instead. Defensive Microbots. Seeing as most of his damage is dealt in slow, singular hits, you might think that attack speed isn't as important to take on Captain. This couldn't be more wrong, as his passive, Defensive Microbots, becomes significantly stronger when paired with attack speed. Vulcan Shotgun. Captain's primary fire has the ability to apply a surprising amount of knockback onto airborne enemies. Because of this, you can try to put a wall behind an enemy when you shoot them so that they get launched into it, taking massive damage. Also, remember that this ability suffers from damage fall-off, so charging it might be a waste of time if an enemy is too far away. Power Taser. This ability's entire meaning in this world is to hold enemies still for your utility orbital strikes and nothing else. You can also use it to interrupt some medium enemies from completing their attacks, like the Greater Wisps and Stone Golem. Orbital Probe. When targeting where you want your missile strikes to land, you can choose to target airborne enemies. This sounds helpful, but due to the wind-up time of the attack and how much airborne enemies tend to move around, it can sometimes miss your intended target. Because of this, it's probably best to just use your shotgun on anything that isn't on the ground. Diablo Strike. This ability, while very powerful, takes a brutal 20 seconds to land, and there's no way to reduce that time even with attack speed. Because of this, the Bandolier is your best friend, as it can allow you to quickly start multiple instances of the Diablo Strike, covering more ground and making you less likely to miss. Remember that it does damage to you as well, so keep your distance from the landing zone. Healing Beacon. Try to set up your healing beacon in places you know that you can fall back to later. Places like around a corner from the teleporter zone, or nearby an interactable you want to buy later. Also interesting is that the healing from multiple healing beacons will stack, so keep that in mind. Hacking Beacon. Your 2 most important targets to focus on with your Hacking Beacon are Shrines of Chance and the guaranteed legendary chests on Sundered Grove and Abyssal Depths. Otherwise, don't bother wasting this ability on single chests when it might be easier to just kill things for the money you need. Shocking Beacon. This beacon is your best friend during the teleporter fight, as it can fairly consistently hold a large group of enemies completely still. I recommend you pair this with your Diablo Strike for some very consistent area of effect damage. Resupply Beacon. Taking this ability over the other beacon options is kind of a waste of time, but if you do try to use it, I recommend you use it with the Recycler. The Recycler can be incredibly powerful in getting you better items, and the Resupply Beacon can help save time by removing its cooldown. Otherwise, it's safe to say that it's usually better to go with something else. Hungering Gaze. There isn't a whole lot to say about this ability, but something interesting is that a single purity will reduce its cooldown to the minimum of 0.5 seconds. Other than that, remember not to take too many stacks of Visions of Heresy, as the cooldown can be incredibly punishing. Slicing Maelstrom. In a similar vein to a few of the abilities we've talked about previously, throwing this attack at your enemy's feet is the best way to get maximum value out of it. It won't collide with enemies, but by doing this, you can at least hit it a little more consistently. Shadow Fade. Please be sure to watch your health bar. Heretic suffers from negative health regeneration, and this ability is your only way of avoiding it, so just be sure to keep an eye on your health and use your Shadow Fade accordingly. Ruin. Don't just watch your own health bar, but watch your enemy's health bar as well, since it's where you can see how many stacks of Ruin they have applied on them. Always wait until they have at least 7 to 10 stacks so you can consistently deal at least 1000% damage or more with the ability. Nevermore. There really isn't much to say about Nevermore, seeing as it literally does nothing, but I suppose I'll recycle my old useless fact and tell you that the Shuriken will still work with Nevermore in the primary slot. Magnetic Accelerator. When playing Railgunner, you can get guaranteed critical hits by shooting an enemy's weak point. Because of this, items that increase your critical hit chance, and subsequently your critical hit damage, become much more powerful on Railgunner, especially the Lensmaker's glasses, so pick them up whenever you find them. XQR Smart Round System. Try to learn how the tracking on this ability actually works. Doing this will give you a lot more advantages for dealing with enemies since you can attack them around corners and over ledges. Also, if you have enough attack speed, you can fly during this ability. M99 Sniper. Picking up backup mags will allow you to shoot multiple times when scoped. Doing this is a great way to make up for the lost DPS taken by the reload mechanic, even if the rest of the shots won't benefit from active reload's damage boosts. Active reload. Be sure to pick up at least a few attack speed items because the area you need to hit for active reload will become much bigger, making it much easier to hit and power up your next attack. HH-44 Marksman. Attack speed is a very good idea to pair with the Marksman, and can lead to some pretty consistent damage if you are able to track the enemy's weak points well enough, so pick those items up when you find them. Concussion Device. Remember that this ability does not give you fall damage immunity like other movement tools do, and should be used primarily for horizontal movement and map traversal. Don't bother using this ability as a defensive tool, as it is your only movement ability and best way to escape a fight. Polar Field Device. Don't bother with this ability. I mean, you can if you want to, but by taking it, you lose access to your only form of movement, which is incredibly important to have. If you insist on using it, at least try to pair it with the Death Mark, as the slow it applies is a unique debuff. Supercharge. Be sure to plan ahead for a place to escape after you use this ability. It will remove your access to all of your abilities beside your utility, so you need to use this time to escape the fight and reposition. Cryocharge. Where Supercharge should be used as the first hit on an enemy, Cryocharge should instead be used to execute them at lower health. Use this to save a lot of time towards the end of the phases in the various boss fights of the game, as freeze can be applied to Mithrix and the False Sun. Void Corruption. The trick to min-maxing your corruption meter is to only take healing items that you can control. Items like the Foreign Fruit and Lepton Daisy that provide more predictable healing are better than items like Wungus, which will constantly reduce your corruption as you heal. The Cautious Slug is also a good idea to take because it actually won't affect your corruption meter even if it heals you. Drown. This attack is pretty simple, but one nice thing is that it does not suffer from damage falloff. Because of this, you are completely free to poke down enemies as far away as you feel is necessary. Corrupted Drown. This ability is the primary reason you want to be corrupted, seeing as it deals a ridiculous amount of damage. Remember that the attack will pierce through enemies, so try to plan ahead so that you can save your corruption for more chaotic moments like the teleporter fight instead of wasting it on a single enemy. Flood. This is something I've been trying to practice, but Flood can actually be charged indefinitely, and you can sprint while charging it if you activate the ability first. This means that you should start charging the ability during the quieter moments of the game so that you have it ready for when the next enemy shows up. Corrupted Flood. There really isn't much to say about the corrupted version of Flood, since it's kind of the same thing as Flood, just more efficient. I suppose you should try to learn the arc of this ability so you can more consistently hit flying enemies and smaller targets. Trespass. If you jump right before entering your trespass, it will bring you just high enough into the air to deal a little bit of fall damage. This doesn't sound useful, but in reality can actually be used to speed up your corruption meter just a little bit more. Corrupted Trespass. I recommend you be a little careful when using the corrupted version of Trespass, since your speed is capped for a moment after leaving the ability. It will often throw you off cliffs or into more danger, so I recommend learning how far this ability actually sends you so you don't make that mistake. Suppress. Suppress is one of the strongest healing abilities in the game, and is the best way of holding off your corruption for a better time. I recommend that you use it both when you need healing, but also in the quieter parts of the game, so that you don't become corrupted when you don't really need to be. Corrupted Suppress. Be very, very careful when using this ability. Rarely will you ever need to use this, so I recommend only using it when you absolutely have to stay in your corrupted mode for longer, such as when you need to execute a wandering vagrant before it explodes. Otherwise, you can safely ignore that this ability even exists most of the time, if for no other reason than your own safety. Inner Strength. Seeker's passive is not as complicated as you might think it is. In reality, it's quite simple, and just increases all of your stats by 1% per stack of Tranquility, which you can see above your abilities and the health bar. Spirit Punch. The first 2 shots of Spirit Punch will go through walls. You can use this to pretty effectively hit enemies from a safer location, like around a corner or through a floor. Unseen Hand. This ability will travel infinitely upward from where it was targeted. Since you can only target terrain, you can actually see if an enemy will be hit if they glow yellow. This can be useful for hitting airborne enemies. Also, this can be used as a decent scouting tool since it zooms out your FOB. Soul Spiral. Spam this ability basically whenever you have it. You always want to have your rotating death shield, even when you think you're safe. Also, when activating this ability, you can cancel any fall momentum you might have, turning it into an effective double jump. Sojourn. While you can stay in your Sojourn for a while to charge it up, it's often used best when used as a simple dodge. Be sure to have your Soul Spiral orbs out whenever entering the ability if you can, as hits from the orbs will grant you barrier, allowing you to stay safe in Sojourn for significantly longer. Reprieve. I'm gonna be honest, I rarely use Reprieve because Sojourn is just that good, but if you do choose to use this ability, remember to build up as much barrier as you can before going into it so that you can stay in it for longer. Remember that unlike Sojourn, Reprieve does not grant damage immunity, so plan accordingly. Meditate. You should definitely be careful when entering Meditate since it holds you still, but because it gives you barrier and healing, don't be afraid to use it in the middle of a fight as its damage is nothing to scoff at. This can also be used to stall mid-air when skipping pillars to give your utility more time to cool down. Palm Blast. Just because this ability demands you hit at least 3 enemies to get a stack of Tranquility doesn't mean you shouldn't wait for a bigger group of enemies first. Every 3 enemies you hit will grant you an additional stack of Tranquility, and every large enemy or boss you hit will also grant a stack of Tranquility, allowing you to potentially get multiple stacks much faster than you could with Meditate. Remember that you will not get the Saving Grace buff that revives you once on death when using Palm Blast, so play carefully. Lunar Tampering. This passive seems complicated, but to boil it down to its absolute basic components, you should be shooting all of your spikes out when you need to heal, and hold on to them when you need to attack faster in close range. It's that simple. Club of the Forsaken. By pairing it with movement equipment items like the Volcanic Egg or Milky Chrysalis, you can artificially increase your fall time when using the secondary slam attack of this ability. Remember that after 1.5 seconds of falling, both the attack radius and proc coefficient will increase, making it much stronger. Lunar Spikes. This ability is quite spammable, and seeing as it is a secondary ability, it is an excellent pair for the Luminous Shot. When used in conjunction with your primary slam attack, you can get an incredible amount of value from an otherwise underwhelming item. Lunar Stakes. This ability will pierce enemies and trigger a lightning strike on every enemy it hits and at the place it lands. Because of this, when fighting a single enemy, try to pierce them from above so that both the lightning strikes on them and the ground hits the enemy you are trying to attack. Step of the Brothers. Step of the Brothers can be used while charging either your primary slam attack or the laser of the Father without interrupting them. You can use this if the slowed movement from charging either of those abilities puts you in a compromising position. Meridian's Will. The primary value of this teleport is how it triples the effects of your passive, Lunar Tampering, for a few seconds after you teleport. This is especially useful when you need a quick burst of healing, as the added base regeneration grants a surprisingly high amount of healing. Growth will also increase the duration of this buff. Laser of the Father. Do not bother using this ability if you aren't going to charge it. When used uncharged, the laser's damage is absolutely pathetic, and you end up mostly wasting your time. Other than that, remember that using this refreshes your secondary stocks over time, which can be metagamed fairly easily. Laser Burst. With just 2 stocks of Laser Burst, you can quickly refresh all of your secondary charges. Other than that, this ability should be saved for dealing with harder to hit targets like wisps and blind pests. Chef's Kiss. This ability doesn't actually check if you hit an enemy with 2 or more abilities, just that you used them in the general direction of that enemy. This was sort of fixed, but not really during the roadmap. It's kinda muddy, but because of this, you can use your primary and secondary ability to lower the enemy first, and then use your utility kind of near them, and it will apply a stack of this passive. In case this has since been patched, another tip is to remember that it doesn't matter how many abilities you use to proc this, since it will always heal for 8% of your maximum health. Dice. The value of holding out the cleavers after throwing them is not that they will deal continuous damage to enemies they touch, but is more from how they will deal double damage and have much higher proc coefficient on the way back if they were suspended. Use this to deal massive damage to groups of enemies. Just remember to put the enemy you want to hit in between you and the suspended cleavers. You can see when the cleaver's damage will be doubled when it does the little flash at the end of its trajectory. Seer. The range of this ability is much larger than its visual effect, so don't be afraid to use it on an enemy even if you think you can't reach them. This ability is what Artificer's flamethrower wishes it was, so use it liberally. Icebox. If you get enough backup magazines, this ability can almost replace your primary attack. Remember that you cannot freeze larger enemies, so don't bother throwing any ice cubes their way as you'll only slow them. Roll. When used against a steep but not vertical piece of the environment, you can pretty reliably gain a ridiculous amount of height. This can be used most effectively on Commencement, where you can roll up one of the walls by the Pillars of Design and jump straight up to the Mithrix arena. Oil Spill. Similarly to Acrid's jumps, Oil Spill can be used to climb steep surfaces that you otherwise couldn't climb with just normal jumps. Other than that, be sure to actually ignite or freeze your oil trail, as the mobility granted by this ability isn't all that great. Glaze. Don't be afraid to use this ability without igniting or freezing the oil spill it leaves behind. When used in close range, the damage of it is kind of ridiculous, and is great for dealing with beefier targets like Greater Wisps, Parents, and Stone Golems. Yes, Chef. I'm a firm believer that the best powered up ability is your primary fire, Dice. Simply power up, walk inside or under an enemy, and explode into cleavers. It works flawlessly every time, and has the potential to deal massive damage. Anyways, that is finally going to do it for this video on one tip for each ability in Risk of Rain 2. I hope you were able to learn something, and if you weren't, thanks for watching through to the end of the video, I guess. Be sure to leave your own ability tips in the comments below, and while you're down there, you should totally subscribe. Thank you to our YouTube members for supporting me like they do, and thank you again for watching. Bye-bye.